sees the television station here. Walter Rogers, CNN, Moscow.
President Clinton continues to voice his
perhaps 1,000 or a few more at that time. Some perhaps 500 demonstrators reformed there today, but there had been a call for a major demonstration at October Square where this group came from. Probably, as I said, about 5,000 people who broke through police barricades repeatedly, marching along Moscow's Garden Ring Road from October Square, where there's a giant statue of Vladimir Lenin, a rallying point for these mainly communist demonstrators. They marched along that road past Gorky Park, over the Moscow River, past the Foreign Ministry, and on to the White House where we see them now. It's a huge crowd now massing behind the White House, listening to people address them. A very emotional moment for these people to have regained their turf.
Is it not true, Steve, that many of these people, if not most of them, are very, very disappointed in the way that the reforms have gone? They're not happy with these reforms, and they're certainly not happy with the speed in which they have taken place.
Well, these people are a core group, and I wanted to talk about that, Ralph, a little bit. A core group of people who have periodically demonstrated over the past months against Boris Yeltsin, against just what you said. Their disappointment in the way Russia is going, the reforms that Boris Yeltsin is trying to implement. They want the old Soviet Union back. They're rallying behind Alexander Rutskoy, a hero of the Afghan War, who has himself said inside that White House that it is time to try to reform the Soviet Union. Of course, that's a very difficult task in this day and age. So these are a hardcore group of people, very much opposed to Boris Yeltsin, very much opposed to his economic reforms, his political reforms, people who liked it the way it was when there was a Soviet Union and a Communist Party ruling this country. And the point should be made that while you're seeing some very dramatic pictures, we heard gunfire on live television, that most of Moscow is still calm. Virtually all of Moscow is still calm. A city of 9 million people with 5,000 of those people demonstrating noisily. So these pictures give you a very skewed view of how the country is feeling as a whole, I believe, but they certainly do show you the drama of this political standoff in its 13th day since Boris Yeltsin disbanded Parliament and ousted Alexander Rutskoy as his vice president and called for new parliamentary elections in December, later saying that he himself would stand for early elections in June. Ralph?
Steve, following up with what you were talking about just a moment ago, in your best guess, the number of people who are opposed to the Yeltsin reforms and the ones who are supporting Yeltsin, who feel that his are the good ideas, the best ideas, who is ahead in all of this?
Well, Ralph, there's no good polling information nationwide, but best guess around here is that somewhere between 50 and 55% of the nation supports what Boris Yeltsin is trying to do, whereas somewhere between 16 to 18% are represented by these people who have again massed at the White House, who violently broke through police lines today and are supporting Alexander Rutskoy and Ruslan Khasbulatov and the 100 or so hardline deputies of the Congress of People's Deputies that are still holed up inside the White House, as I said, in this 13th day of the standoff here. So the broader support still seems to be well behind President Boris Yeltsin, with a small minority supporting Alexander Rutskoy and wanting to go back to the days of communism. Once again, with a picture of our live camera from the balcony at the rear of the White House.
And these are the people, I suppose, Steve, that don't even want to see any elections take place, correct?
The only thing that these people would like to see elections take place for is for president. But this crisis here, Ralph, seems to have moved beyond the issue of elections. We don't even hear talk about trying to negotiate over who runs for office or when, who runs for office or when. It's now just a raw and naked struggle for power in the country. With that gunfire we heard, it's moved even closer to a violent struggle for power. I find it hard to imagine that this day will close without some further violence. I hate to predict such a thing, but there is so much tension around the White House in these few square blocks with these masses of people shoved together, surrounded by troops with guns, and the soldiers and the police who tried to stop them have very much lost face, are in disarray, and I'm sure that there is bound to have been a goodly number of injuries along this march as the demonstrators broke through police lines. Injuries on both sides.
Steve, we heard about a week ago, I believe it was, that some members of parliament were saying if all of this doesn't get settled pretty soon, they're going to move to another city, just leave Moscow altogether. Have you heard any more about that?
No, there's Alexander Rutskoy preparing to address the crowd. He was Boris Yeltsin's running mate during their elections in June 1991. He was a close ally of Boris Yeltsin. Let's listen to him, see what he has to say.
Young people, combat-ready men, everybody should be forming detachments, and we should now attack the mayor's office under Stankenau, and we should assault those two buildings and win. Everybody who's strong enough, I'm asking old men and women to stay away from this operation. All the other ones who are combat ready, get together, form detachments, attack the mayor's office, and then let's move on to attack the Stankenau television center. Don't worry, all this scum of society will be put behind the bars. On behalf of everybody who issued orders to beat up the demonstrators, I was listening to these orders via this police radio. I am now appealing to the law enforcement agencies and personnel of the law enforcement agencies. You have just seconds before you can take the side of the people. I would like to warn everyone who is in these detachments. All your names are listed and you will be held responsible before the law. I ask you to defect to the people, and all the demonstrators, I'm asking to do this. Stand up, take positions on the left-hand side. Let us form detachments now and attack the mayor's office. Please be as disciplined as you can. It should all be a very organized matter. We should be doing it in a very...
Saying that the demonstrators should now form into brigades and attack the Moscow mayor's office, and far across town, the Russian television broadcasting center called Ostankino. We have tape now ready to go for you of what it sounded like here and what it looked like when those gunshots went off. Let's listen to that. Jesus Christ, we got to get live on this. You hear that, Alec? We got to get this on TV. Well, Ralph, we've just had the first serious shots fired in this crisis, and many of them, several hundred gunshots fired, as a crowd of 3,000 to 5,000 began moving towards the White House, broke through barricades. Just listen now, the gunfire has silenced itself for a few moments. See now the front of the White House from our camera on the roof of the CNN Bureau. Speaker still addressing the crowd of people gathered behind the White House, these 3,000 to 5,000 demonstrators who marched from October Square about 3 miles away down the Moscow Ring Road, breaking through police lines repeatedly as police fired tear gas and rubber bullets, climbing like so many ants over water trucks and barbed wire that barricaded the White House and retaken their demonstrating position. We've just heard ousted Vice President Alexander Rutskoy, formerly a Yeltsin crony and pal, a Yeltsin supporter at one time, now the most vicious enemy of the Russian president, ordering these people to form into brigades and attack the Moscow mayor's office and the television broadcasting center Ostankino. A big crowd still milling around at the end of Kutuzovsky Prospect here near the Moscow River, around the White House where this police interior ministry, this is a picture of the Moscow mayor's office right now. It's adjacent to the White House, just across the street, the former headquarters of Comecon, which was the Soviet bloc trading organization until the Soviet bloc fell apart. Inside that building, several thousand of these Interior Ministry troops have been billeted since this crisis really came to a head several nights ago when the cordon was thrown up around the White House, and several thousand troops of the Interior Ministry began blocking the re-entry of demonstrators to the White House and the exit of the people inside the building, trying to force the exit of the people inside the building. For a time, all electricity, telephones, heat, and hot water were turned off to the White House. Those services had recently been turned back on as negotiations began under the auspices of the Russian Orthodox Patriarch Alexei II. There were hopes for a time that there might be some sort of negotiated breakthrough in this standoff. Those talks apparently are still going on, but are in recess at this hour, according to Mr. Rutskoy's people. The talks are going on with the deputy Voronin still meeting with the government side. There's a picture of troops going back up in front of the mayor's office, probably having heard this call from Rutskoy for an attack on the building. There seems, at this point, no major defection from the side of the Interior Ministry to the demonstrators, as the former vice president had called for in his brief remarks to this crowd.
Steve, Rutskoy certainly appeared to be trying to fire up the crowd as much as he could. Would you tend to believe that they are of the mood right now to follow his orders?
Clearly, the people who are trained military men who are inside the White House are in the mood to do that. Guns were passed out from the White House, and there were a lot of people, so-called defenders of the White House, these paramilitary groups inside there who were seen coming out of the building with guns as that gunfire was going off that we showed you the tape of earlier. So certainly they're in the mood, but you can see this crowd from our live camera at the back of the White House. These don't look like the kind of people who can do much but march in mass. These are mainly elderly people. You see a lot of women in the crowd. None of these people, of course, are armed, and certainly not the kind of people who could lead their way back into see cars moving now in front of the White House. These are black Volgas, the kind of cars that would carry Russian officials. Obviously, we don't know who would have been in those cars. If it were some of the leadership from either the parliament or Rutskoy moving away from the White House, it would be very indicative either that they're going someplace in a hurry to talk to somebody, or they're getting out of the White House quickly, fearing what's coming. We can't see him right now, but speaking through that bullhorn is Ruslan Hasbulatov, chairman of the parliament. Just listen to what he has to say.
Law and order that Muscovites, our people, our nation, will not allow anyone to usurp the power. And we have won. We have prevailed. I want to thank you all for being here. It's you guys who have defended the honor of this country. You have proved to all foreign propaganda workers who have been telling everyone that we are slaves, that we report to a dictatorship. You have shown them all that we are free people, that we're people who have honor and dignity, and we will not tolerate any usurpers for a single minute. I am calling on our courageous warriors to bring troops here, to bring tanks here, in order to attack the Kremlin and all the usurpers and the former criminals, including Yeltsin. Yeltsin should be put in the Matrosskaya Tishina prison, and all his sidekicks should be driven underground. There should be an open trial. I am asking everyone to get organized in order to attack and seize the mayor's office and the Ostankino television center. This is a beehive of criminals, of villains, of counter-revolutionaries. Dear friends, we today are beginning the most resolute attack against the bulwarks of criminals who have seized power from the people. I would like to thank you so much, my dear fellow countrymen, my dear Russians, my dear Muscovites. Thank you so much indeed.
That was Ruslan Khasbulatov, chairman of the banned Russian parliament, echoing the calls of Alexander Ruskoy, calling on these people to form up and attack the Moscow mayor's office just across the street. And across town, way across town, the Russian television broadcasting center, Ostankino, he also made a call on these people to form up and attack the Kremlin, where Boris Yeltsin has his office. A very, very fiery and dangerous speech at this moment, because these people still are surrounded by thousands of armed Interior Ministry troops. Picture now from our roof location where I'm speaking from. The Moscow's mayor's office, in that picture with orange water trucks in the front. Those had been put there late last week when the Interior Ministry formed this cordon around the White House. It has now been broken by these demonstrators. Some 3,000 to 5,000 of them took a long march from October Square and the statue of Vladimir Lenin along Moscow's Ring Road, breaking through police line after police line, undergoing attacks from tear gas canisters and rubber bullets, and finally reaching the White House, where they have regained their demonstration place at the back.
Steve, in light of Khasbulatov's speech a moment ago, and as you put it quite correctly, a dangerous speech, where does the military stand in all of this?
The military officially stands four square behind Boris Yeltsin. His defense minister, Pavel Grachev, has repeatedly said that the military stands behind Boris Yeltsin as commander-in-chief. We've seen no defections to this point from the Interior Ministry troops, a separate ministry from the Ministry of Defense. The military here is divided into the armed forces designed to repulse attacks from abroad. That would be the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, and the Interior Ministry, which is effectively a police force inside the country. But these are heavily armed soldiers, not just policemen, and they're trained to deal with problems just like this. We can see now at the back of the White House some of the trucks that were commandeered by these demonstrators as they marched toward the White House. It's difficult to see what's going on. Obviously, those trucks, which are troop carriers, have been brought in to move people. We don't know how many trucks they have at their disposal. However, we can see from our vantage point on the bridge, there are perhaps 6 to 8 to 10 trucks at their disposal. Ruskoy is down in the crowd, apparently, with a megaphone, trying to organize these people. You can see them forming up in line, standing at attention now. One of the men with a helmet on, others in civilian clothes.
All right, Steve, some local cable operators will be cutting away for a commercial message at this time, CNN's, and so will we. We will continue our live coverage from Moscow in just a moment.
You're gonna kill.
Do you realize just how much difference there?
Good morning, I'm Ralph Wenge in Atlanta. We are continuing our live coverage of the demonstrations in Moscow this morning that began about a half an hour ago when anti-Yeltsin demonstrators broke through the blockade of the Parliament building. Estimates say there are anywhere from 8,000 to 10,000 demonstrators there. Warning shots were fired into the air by riot police. Apparently, no one was hurt by these shots. Apparently, the police did not fire at the demonstrators themselves. The lawmakers have been inside for about 11 days now. Right now, we want to bring you the tape of the shooting earlier, about a half an hour ago. Let's watch.
We see it. Where are you guys now?
Ralph, from
All right, as we said, those were the scenes taped about a half an hour ago of the shooting from the riot police toward the demonstrators not being hurt. The man who has been watching all of this for us and reporting on it is our CNN Moscow Bureau Chief, Steve Hurst. Steve?
Ralph, most recently, Alexander Rutskoy, as you see a live picture now from our roof camera at the CNN Bureau. Alexander Rutskoy, the ousted vice president and Afghan war hero, was mixing in the crowd with a bullhorn trying to organize his forces behind the White House. That picture now live from behind the White House. Organize his people for an attack that he has ordered upon the Moscow mayor's office, and the Russian broadcasting center, Ostankino, across town. The crowd seems to have diminished somewhat behind the White House. Apparently these people moving off in other directions. But these attacks that have been called for by Rutskoy and Ruslan Hasbulatov, the chairman of the parliament, who even called for an attack on the Kremlin. Very inflammatory speeches in what has so far been a war of words that got a bit violent just a few minutes ago as these demonstrators broke through police cordons. Now we have another live picture from another vantage point. This is a skyscraper behind the White House. And you can see the crowd there milling around still. Some of the water trucks that had been brought in as barricades being moved around also. It was from this vantage point that several nights ago we showed you the overwhelming Interior Ministry force that had formed around the Russian White House, the Parliament building, now in the 13th day of what I would call a siege. The 100 or so deputies still holed up inside, led by Ruslan Hasbulatov and Alexander Rutskoy. We've had no official reaction from President Boris Yeltsin about this latest activity. It said 5,000 or so demonstrators broke through police barrier after police barrier, ran a gauntlet of tear gas and rubber bullets, moving some 4 miles perhaps from October Square back to the White House, where they've retaken their ground, their demonstrating position. There is a great deal of confusion. You see a line of police there in the lower part of that corner, the corner of that picture from our live camera behind the White House. The Interior Ministry troops sent out to block these demonstrators in complete disarray after they broke through line after line of them on their march to the White House. Ralph?
Steve, is there any indication that any of these demonstrators have moved toward the mayor's office as they were told to do?
Well, they are at the mayor's office. It's just a matter of if they get organized to attack. That's the picture of the mayor's office right now, the former Comic-Con building, which sits right at the end of the bridge over the Moscow River here on Kutuzovsky Prospect, where our bureau is. No sign yet of an attack, but there is a clear sign that these people are trying to organize something under the direction of ousted Vice President Alexander Rutskoy, who called for an attack on the mayor's office, for an attack on Ostankino, the Russian broadcasting center that is in the hands of Boris Yeltsin and has been used by his people clearly against what is really a fairly small group of people causing all of this trouble. Let's assume even that there are 10,000 people out there. Moscow is a city of 9 million people, and if we could move our camera farther on down the road, you would see people going about their business, shopping, and the city, aside from this small area around the White House at this point, is completely calm.
You said earlier, Steve, that the riot police were clearly outnumbered by the demonstrators. Have they brought in any more forces?
Would you please repeat, Ralph?
You mentioned earlier that the riot police were outnumbered by the demonstrators. Any indication of any new forces being moved in?
Not at this point. We don't see indications of that. I think that there are plenty of forces billeted in the mayor's building, which is just across the street from the White House, and also across the river at the Hotel Ukraine. There's the crowd moving towards the mayor's office. We can see smoke in this picture. I don't know what the source of that is. Some indications that might have been an APC, an armored personnel carrier starting up. Those have huge diesel engines and they would give off billows of smoke like that. This crowd now moving toward, there's the APC, you can see it now. Two of them moving away from the mayor's office, one more parked with its engine running as the crowd moves by it, up a ramp that goes to the mayor's building, the Moscow Municipal Building. A huge crowd of people heading towards that building. And there are a lot of troops, we believe, inside the building, all of them armed. You see the armored personnel carriers now moving away from the scene. People running, mainly moving towards the building, some others moving away.
What kind of leadership do these demonstrators have, Steve? Obviously, it was Kozbolatov and Rutskoy who fired them up with their speeches a while ago, but who's leading them on the ground, do you suppose?
The people leading them on the ground are a dangerous group of people. There are mercenaries. There are people who are Afghan war veterans, people perhaps discharged from the military during the coup for their participation in the coup. They are former soldiers who have fought in places like Moldova, where there were bitter ethnic battles. Also, they've been fighting in Nagorno-Karabakh. Is that gunfire we hear from that camera? Yeah, I could hear from our camera location that you're seeing the picture from now, behind the White House, what appeared to be gunshots.
Steve, could you help us a little bit from your vantage point? Where is this crowd heading now? Where are they moving toward?
They're moving towards the Moscow mayor's office, which is just across the street from the White House. You can see those water tank trucks moving. That is a street that runs in front of the new American Embassy compound. There's a picture now from where I am standing on the roof of the CNN building. That's the Moscow mayor's building. Just to the left of that is the White House. And between the White House and, stop right there, that is the American Embassy, that red building, the new American Embassy compound. A lot of the activity going on is in clear view of diplomats who live inside that compound.
The demonstrators were told to storm the mayor's office, but were they told to do anything once they got inside?
They were told to attack the mayor's office. Ruslan Kozbolatov said that there is a beehive of criminals inside that building. That is where the Interior Ministry, loyal still to Boris Yeltsin, had billeted a few thousand troops as this crisis grew toward a head when a cordon was put around the White House late last week. What they meant by an attack, what was to happen when and if they got inside the building, we don't know, but I suppose the intention is to occupy the mayor's office and to evict the soldiers. Now, how that could happen, you have a group of basically unarmed civilians, a lot of older men and women in this crowd of demonstrators. What they could possibly do against the troops that we believe are still in that building with their guns, we just don't know. People still flooding across the street towards the mayor's building.
Steve, I'm going to ask you to stand by for a moment. We are going to continue our live coverage from Moscow right after we take this short break. We'll be right back. Now, specifically, shortly after 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and about an hour ago, anti-Yeltsin demonstrators stormed the, broke through the blockade of the Parliament building, where lawmakers have been holed up for about 11 days now. The Parliament building in the square, nearby the mayor's office, the demonstrators also a short while ago told by their leadership to storm the mayor's office. And also in this same area, CNN's bureau, and atop the bureau, our chief, Steve Hurst.
Ralph, while we were in that commercial break, there was sporadic gunfire again. Just as we went into the break, we could see pictures of people from this vantage point running up that ramp near the Mir Hotel, the Peace Hotel, which sits just behind the mayor's office, between the mayor's office and the United States Embassy compound. As that running began, then we heard sporadic gunfire. It has now stopped again. These people have been ordered, as you heard earlier, by Alexander Rutskoy, the ousted vice president, and then that was backed up by Ruslan Hasbulatov, the chairman of this banned parliament inside the White House, to attack the mayor's office, also to attack across town at the Russian Broadcasting Center. A picture now of troops in flak jackets. This is moving across the bridge from our vantage point on the roof of the CNN bureau.
Steve, they are wearing flak jackets, as you point out, but we haven't seen any indication yet, have we, that the demonstrators are armed?
Yes, the demonstrators, some of them are armed, Ralph. When the crowd first made its